300 mark. And so one last reminder, everyone, please put your name in the chat log for attendance, and we'll get started. So hope the classes are going well. You're welcome back to the second day of the seminar series. We have a very exciting speaker here today. We have Don Kiefer. He is a senior lecturer at MIT in the Sloan School of Management, and he lectures primarily in the executive MBA program. But Don has built a career in improving and transforming teams, businesses, and organizations to improve innovation, strategy, and creativity, as well as technical work. He's founded the company called ShiftGear, which is a ShiftGear Work Design. It's a consulting firm. And he created the dynamic work design, which he's going to talk to you about today. He's done education and consulting that has reached 5 continents. He has a very, very diverse and varied background, and he has a lot of lessons to share with you today. So please make sure you enter questions in the chat. We'll pause at the right point during his talk to answer some of those questions. Don't be shy. You weren't yesterday. I don't think you're going to be again today. So enjoy the talk, and over to you, Don. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. Just one more thing I'll add to the background is I'm not an academic. I don't have an academic background. I do have an engineering degree, but I have a work background. So I started work when I was a kid, working in machine shops, got a college education later. And the reason my career went where it went was because I was a fixer. I could solve problems first on machines and in the factory floor, and then later on in the whole organization. So I'm not afraid of any questions. I have a lot of stories and examples. So as Jen said, feel free to ask questions, and we'll help you get going as good as we can. You're going to get a lot of sessions while you're here on technical help, but this session is more operational help. And by operational design, I mean how you work together, how you structure your team. Who does what? What do you do when you have a problem? Who communicates with who? And all of that stuff that happens around doing the technical work you're gonna do. There are basically 2 types of operational design work. So think about setting your team up, the way you set your team up as a design. And there are basically 2 types. The first type is static. A static design. And it's called static because, like this humorous organizational chart, it doesn't change much. Once we decide who the principal of the school is and who the teachers and the administrators are, it stays that way mostly for the year. There might be some changes, but this doesn't change that much. Like in a company, once we get the CEO and the vice presidents and the managers, there's some minor changes, but that organizational chart stays the same. These static pieces of design, like a process map, would be another example of a static piece of design, or a policy or procedure. They're important because they tell us who can make what decision, who can spend what money, who controls what resources. So we need that to organize ourselves, especially in big organizations. But the thing that this static design piece does not do is it doesn't help us understand how to get the work done. For that, we need something that's much less known, because we've just invented it, called dynamic work design. And excuse me for that. So in dynamic work design, we want to think about work as it moves through the organization, starting with an idea. So imagine an idea starting on the left side of that chart and working through the organization, and out the other side comes either an intellectual product or a physical product for some sort of customer. This hierarchical organizational chart does not really tell the people in it how to do the work or how to work together to make all that happen. So when I teach executive students, they're usually in their late 30s, early 40s. They've got a lot of experience. They're usually pretty high up in the organization, have a very talented people. And I ask them, can you draw a dynamic design of how work moves through your organization? They sometimes look at me like, you know how a puppy looks at you like, what are you talking about? Like, what? So that's the kind of look I get, but I give them like 10 or 15 minutes. I know they can talk about this org chart and draw it in 10 or 15 minutes. So if they know it, they should be able to draw it in 15 minutes. So I ask them, go away, give me a drawing. 15 minutes later, I get all kinds of crazy stuff. This is my favorite one because it's the most honest. And the quote is, I'm not really sure how all the work comes. It comes in and there's like this big tangled mess and process boxes and silos, and out the other end comes work. I don't really understand how it happens. So this is why we need to understand dynamic work design a little bit better, and how I'm going to help you with some basic steps of how to get your teams working the best way so you can solve the problems more quickly and win the competitions. There are three basic pieces of this. One is the general idea. Secondly, I'll get into the principles and methods. And the third piece is we'll do a little bit about visual management, which is the biggest tool that you're going to be able to use to help yourselves. So imagine yourself as a surgeon. Okay, this is me imagining myself as a surgeon. And actually, surgeon is kind of a scientist doing very technical work. Not in a factory, not an office. They work pretty much alone. They have a team around them. But this is an example from Johns Hopkins Hospital, where the problem was they had 7 or 8 surgical suites used on an outpatient basis. But they could only get like 60 or 70% of the amount of surgeries done that were possible because of all the operational problems. The patient was there, the doctor was there, but they were missing this or missing that, or the patient was late, or the doctor was late, or they didn't have the data, or they didn't have the instrument. So all these operational problems were hurting them. And they asked me to come in and help them raise the utilization rate of those 8 surgical suites. One thing I did was I went to observe a surgery. So I get all gowned up like this, and I walk into the operating room. And I sit in the back and I'm watching the surgery happen. I'm watching the people come in, the patient come in, the doctor come in, instruments flying, people talking. And all of a sudden the doctor stops and he turns to me, looks up and says, "Oh, are you the guy that's going to come in here and tell me how to do my surgery better?" And I said, "No, sir, I'm not going to tell you what to do with that knife in your hands. In fact, this whole surgery looks like a ballet to me. Everyone knows what's happening. Instruments are flying. There are little code secret words you're using, and everyone kind of knows what they're doing." But I said, outside this room, to get the patient here, to get the nurse here, to get the anesthesiologist here, to get the assistant here, to get all the materials in the room, to get the room clean, that is definitely not a ballet. And what I'm here to do is help fix all those problems around the surgery so you can do your surgery better, faster, and more of them with less worry. And he stopped and he said, "You're welcome in my surgical suite anytime. But let me show you what we did." So this is how we mapped out the dynamic work design of what's happening. And let me explain what it is. The purple Post-its on the left are the steps the patient goes through at the doctor's office to get the diagnosis and to get the surgery scheduled. And then move up to the top. There are 3 purple ones in a row with pink ones in between. The first purple one is pre-op. The second one is in the OR, in the operating room. And the third one is post-op. So that's sort of the path of the patient. The rest of it is just, I take that middle step of the surgery and blow out all the steps. And that's what the yellow, orange, and blue are, just that one step. So on the top is the patient coming in. All the steps once the patient's there to come in and get into the surgical suite. The orange is all the things that have to be done to get the room ready and the right people. The only part of the actual surgery are those 3 little squares. That's the doctor doing the surgery. So you can get a feel for how much operational work has to be designed to get to the point where everyone's in the right place. They can actually do their scientific work, their research, their creative work, their problem-solving work. And that's what this is about. Dynamic work design. How can we fit all this stuff together to make the whole system work? Just one more thing is all those little Post-it notes with the pink on them, the pink with the 2 arrows, are all the things they're missing, all the information flows they're missing so that the system can work together smoothly. And that's what we set about. That's what we set about solving. Okay, any questions so far? Static and dynamic work design. We're going to talk about how people work together. The human system. Okay.
Nothing yet.
Okay, so let's have a little fun. Let's watch a movie. what I want you to do, this is from an old TV show from the 50s, and the main star is Lucille Ball, who was one of the most famous female comedians in the early 50s, and especially the first one to break into TV big time. So this is a scene from a little skit, and they're working in a candy factory. It's only about 30 seconds long. And what I'd like you to do is type into the chat box, what's wrong with the design of this work? Why are they having so much trouble? And see if you can give me some reasons why it is. Okay, you ready? Just type the reasons why the job is not working so well in the chat box.
Listen carefully. This is the wrapping department.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the candy will pass by on this conveyor belt and continue into the next room where the girls will pack it. Now, your job is to take each piece of candy and wrap it in one of these papers and then put it back on the belt. You understand?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Let her roll! Let her roll! Well, wait here. Somebody's asleep at the switch.
What are you doing up here? I thought you were downstairs boxing chocolates.
Oh, they kicked me out of there fast.
Why?
I kept pinching them to see what kind they were. The fourth department I've been in.
Oh, I didn't do so well either.
All right, girls. Now, this is your last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired.
Yes, ma'am.
Let her roll!
Well, this is easier. Yeah, we can handle this, okay? Listen, Ethel, I think this...
Fine, you're doing splendidly. Speed it up!
Okay, great. I've been watching the comments in the chat box and they're fabulous. And a couple points about that. One, I saw the question, can you explain again the difference between static and dynamic work design? And let me do that as an introduction to my other comments. Static work design is how we set the structure of the organization. So like in some sort of factory, that structure is going to be very hierarchical, like in a chip making factory or an automobile factory. But it's we design who's in charge and how we break up the departments and who reports to who and how much spending authority they have. The other designs, if we go to a high-tech firm like a Google or an Apple, the structure would be much lower, more based in teams, and the authority shows up in a different way. So how we set that structure and draw it on the wall is static because that is the structure. It doesn't change. It periodically changes, but it's not moving. Dynamic work design is about when we turn that structure on and the work starts moving through it like this, like turn on the bell. Now we can see the dynamic work design. When things are moving, who does what? What do I do when there's a problem? I get input, I do work, I give my output. Who does the output go to? And how do we see if there's a problem and who responds? All those kinds of things are dynamic as the work is moving. And the other thing about dynamic work design, as we've termed it, is it's specifically about human work. And that's why your comments are so insightful, even though You're in high school. For the most part, you're in high school, I believe. And you don't have a lot of experience in the work world. You don't need to be trained in work design to know what humans need to be able to do their work well. It's pretty simple. So our view of dynamic work design, it's how we design and operate human work. The actual work doesn't make any difference. They could be making cars, not candy. They could be doing coding or any kind of intellectual work. They could be doing mergers and acquisitions, because what they're doing is someone's doing work, they're handing it off to someone else, and it moves down the line. And that's a human activity, regardless of the type of the work. So dynamic work design is the design of work when things start moving, and it has to do with how we wire the people together to do it correctly. Now, let's get to the comments. The most common comment I saw was bad communication. Now that's true, but that's not a design comment. That's the personal attribution. And that's the problem with today's work world. We set up the static design, we set targets, and then we say, go do the work. And if something goes wrong, by the way, it's going to be your fault. So, but if I look at work design, I don't say you should communicate more, or you should communicate less, or you should communicate. We design what exactly is the communication. So some of you picked up, there's no communication to the person operating the belt. So what would that communication be? What am I supposed to communicate? Let's design that communication so we know when to speed the belt up or slow it down. Let's design the communication so I know when to ask for help. A good example is if a fire happened and there weren't fire alarms, people would say, well, who was supposed to call the fire department? Someone did something wrong. But that's not the way we do fire alarms. Fire alarms, we make a design. We set the fire alarm boxes, the call codes, we drill, everyone knows what to do. Everyone knows when a fire alarm is supposed to be pulled. And when we pull that fire alarm, not only does everyone do what they've been trained to do, exit the building quietly, but the alarm goes to a specific fire department. It just doesn't go out and say, hey, there's a fire. If some fire department's around, maybe you should think about coming over. No, it goes to a specific fire department who's trained to come in a certain amount of time, respond in a certain amount of time. That's an example of work design. We don't want to blame bad performance on personal attributes like you're not a leader, you're not enough of a leader, and don't have enough initiative. What we should say is, no, you should be able to get the work done in this time. If you can't, you should ask for help. And here's who you should ask for help, and that person responds in X amount of time. So that's what we mean by design. Instead of blaming poor performance on personal attributes, we want to look at what's the design, who's supposed to communicate to who and why. And I'm going to show you how to do that. It's not that tough. Okay. Yeah, clear definition, structured methodology, exactly. Now, a lot of the ways we do a job definition and structured methodology is we do a job description. The job description doesn't tell them what to do when Lucy gets overwhelmed and Ethel's supposed to help her. It doesn't, it shows it conceptually, but not in a working way. And the same with the methodology. Methodology usually shows up as a process map, which is the way things are supposed to work. But if we go look at the actual work and see what's really happening, we usually see there are a lot more problems than show up in the conceptual map of what's supposed to happen. We find out what's really happening. And that's the other thing about dynamic work design is we don't just think about it and draw. We have to go look at the work and examine the work as it's happening and begin to solve the problems and structure it that way. And from what we learn, then we put the process map up as a representation of what we learn. So the process map becomes a lagging indicator of what we learned from the process, but the real process is watching the work and can we see it and is it designed properly? Okay. So the other thing about all the comments is they're kind of random. And this happens in business too. Even people with 30, 40, 50 years of experience, their comments will be random because there is no general framework to describe the major rules around human work. So for example, you guys know what work is, right? So someone type in the chat box about what work is. How do you scientifically understand work? Someone type in the formula. F equals MA. Come on, someone. Right, F equals MA. So in science, there's a rule about work. There's a very specific definition about F equals MA. Exactly. But what about human work? We think about it very randomly, like, oh, how much you sweat, or how fast you're moving, or how fast you're typing, or how fast you're talking, or how good your PowerPoint is. So what I want to show you is what we've done in dynamic work design is we've come up with 4 principles that describe what good work looks like. I've been doing this a long time. And so these principles come out of trying to categorize every problem we've ever seen into a principle. We started off with 4, 15 or 20 years ago, and now about 7 or 8 years ago now, we landed on these 4, and I use them a lot. And I cannot find an operational problem that does not fit into one of these 4 principles. So let's put some rules to work design for humans that you can use when you start designing your team, when you start designing your plan for your robots and helicopters and all the stuff that Bob Shin's going to make you do. Okay, the first one is reconcile activity and intent. What this means is every group of people, every organization has the same problem. They have a target, a goal, a mission, something that they're trying to accomplish. Could be a gap, they have a lot of different words for it. And they have human activity to solve that problem, to meet that goal, to close that gap. Of course, they have a lot of computers and software and suppliers and machines, but they can't use any of that without human effort. So if you boil it down, everyone is trying to get super clear, and you will too, super clear on what's the target, how do we measure it, when's it got to be done, and then they want to organize the human activity in the most efficient way possible to meet that target, close the gap. And the way we reconcile it is with feedback, objective feedback. So we have a target, we have activity. I went to do the activity. Did it show up with the results like we thought it would or not? That's the feedback. We're going to reconcile it. We did the activity. Did we get the result? But the activity, the feedback is objective, not like your teacher says, "Oh, Ahmad's really good at reading." It's like a test score. It's like when you pull the door closed and hear the latch click, you know the door is closed. That's the type of feedback I'm talking about. So we do the activity. Did it have the intended result on the metric? Did the software deliver the power to the car or the steering ability that we wanted? That's the check back. That's the reconciliation. We first build the plan with the targets, the human activity, and then we check with the feedback. And when we found we did the activity but didn't get the results, does that mean someone did something wrong? No, it means we have something to learn. So that's the first principle. So the targets clear and quantified? Will the planned activities produce the results? And are we checking results frequently and adjusting the plan? Oh, my thoughts on how Amazon runs their fulfillment centers. I see is my question. I think they're extremely efficient, but I think it's a very top-down, you will do what I tell you type organization. I'm not sure I would want to work there. It's too basic. The basic industrial philosophy about how you design work came from Frederick Taylor 100 years ago. He's the one with Henry Ford that designed the first assembly line. And their idea was the managers know everything. So they're going to design the work and you just do what they tell you. And what happens when you do that is you lose all the learning and the engagement of people doing the work, because while they're doing the work, they're learning where all the real problems are. And Taylor actually thought that he could design the perfect assembly line just around the table, and then that's as good as it could ever get. We know now that's not true. That when we go back and forth with people who design the work and people that do the work, there's a lot of learning that can transfer. So in dynamic work design, the better way is the employees are part of the design. They're doing it a human way. They can get just the same results, but they're part of it. They're more engaged. It's not just being told what to do. They're helping to design with expertise in the management what's happening. So you can get a long ways with all the types of things Amazon is doing, but I'm not sure I'd want to work in one of their warehouses because it's not really engaging. And I think it's just, it's really just automating. It's taking people's brains out, just treating them as hands and legs. But that's my opinion. I don't really have a professional opinion. It's just my personal opinion. Okay, next principle. Once we know what the plan is, can we connect the human chain? In other words, work is moving from person to person to person to person, even intellectual work, especially intellectual work. I get an input, I do some work, I have an output. Even if I put it in the computer might do some algorithms, but the next time any work happens is when a human takes that output and does something with it as their input. So I want to connect all the people in the chain through their inputs and outputs so they know who they are and they have some context of the work. So we're going to connect them through their inputs and outputs along the chain of the work and also up and down in the organization. So when I have a problem, who do I call? Will the team leader or the manager, the supervisor respond? And this is how we connect the front line of work to the management system where all the knowledge and expertise lies. If I have a problem, I want the management system to respond now, not a month later when they read the monthly numbers. When I'm having a problem now, I want someone to help me now. So you'll see this in the design. We connect them two ways. Does everyone know what to do? Do they know who they get their work from, who it goes to? So if there's a problem, they can quickly solve it. And if they have a problem they can't solve, do they know who to call? And that's how we can escalate issues up through the organization. Schools were originally designed, to support industry. Yeah, exactly right. Just reading some of the comments.
So there's one question, maybe from Amanda Sherman. Would you like to ask about efficiency and ethical management?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the question was, how do you balance efficiency with ethical management? Because today we see a lot of companies and corporations that serve their customers well with really good service, and they really maximize the creation of goods. But at the same time, they really work their employees to the bone, to the point where they're really worn out. So how can we kind of change this system?
Well, I'm not sure we can change the system. I think there are some companies very successful in using that method. And they usually have a lot of turnover because that whole bottom layer of employees doesn't really stay long. A lot of turnaround companies use the same method. I know one that actually tells people, we want the best 2 years of your life, then you can leave. So they're just going to wear people out. I just don't think it's a sustainable model. Sometimes you have to get in that mode in a crisis, but not for a long time. And certainly people can make a lot of money and do a lot of good doing that. But I just have opinion it should be, having worked those bottom jobs, I think it's a better way long-term to have people engaged and part of the work. It doesn't mean it's going to be any easier, but when you're part of it, it's different than when you're just being told what to do and you can't make any changes. We know what motivates humans. They're motivated when they know why you're asking them to do what you're asking them to do. For example, you're just not asking me to lay these bricks in a line to this drawing. You're asking me to help you build a cathedral. You know, I could do some things with bricks maybe you don't know about that could help you with your design, but we need to back and forth. I need to understand why you're asking me, not just tell me to lay the bricks. You maybe don't know how to lay bricks. You maybe think you do, but I know more. So tell me what you're trying to do. And that's why we use the intent instead of just target. What's the intent behind your request? The second thing is, once I understand the intent, let me use the skill set that you've hired me for to figure out my own way to do it. Now, I know there's a lot of methods and stuff I should pay attention to and build on and not just go try a new experiment when the method's already figured out. But don't tell me how to do it. Let me do it. Let me figure it out and experiment. And that causes the third thing that drives motivation is, if I'm learning and I see progress both in the work and in my own learning, I'm there. I'm happy. I go home. I might be tired, dead tired, but I go home happy, and I want to come back to work. So there's a lot of academic studies around these. I can't cite them. I'm sure there are other people that can, between companies that use these two methods, and they show in the long run their earnings are better and blah 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 blah, because all the work that's happening, people who are doing the work are all of the time gaining knowledge about the details of that job and where the little problems are. And if you don't tap into that, it gets lost and you just end up telling people what to do. You can be militaristic. And again, some people like that way and works fine for them. But as a person in the system, I think the longer term answer and the better way to work human-wise is dynamic work design, where working with people. Not a free for all, very structured. It's hard work, but I get to play a part in it. I get to play a part in it. Good question. And I don't think this problem will ever be solved with human beings. So be careful who you go work for. I think the advice I give to my kids and students is don't worry about the company. Pay attention to what your boss is like. Because if your boss is just a commander in chief, you're not going to be happy. If your boss is a coach, supporter, and pushes you, then you're going to be happy. Let's take another one, Jen.
Okay, so Willie had a question that was alluding to how this plays into the structure of public education. Willie, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure. This is just something I'm not sure if it's correct, but when I was learning about like US history, I think my teacher brought it up, but there are a lot of parallels between like how sort of we learn in public schools, like how, you know, subjects are broken up into units, and like, you know, there are periods and the bells and that kind of thing. And it seems just like kind of eerily similar to how like this sort of factory efficiency model kind of is structured. Is that by coincidence or?
No, I think it's the same dynamic at play. Like I didn't invent this stuff. Like no one invented water boils at 212, but people discovered the rules behind it. Once they discover the rules behind it, they get a lot more insight about how to use that boiling point in science and industry. And I think this is the same thing. Once you recognize this is a design issue, then you can have all different kinds of insights. It's like the first time people discovered that bacteria was causing disease and not your poor moral character. Then all of a sudden they saw bacteria everywhere and they had a whole bunch of new insights of how to manage illness. So I think that's more what this is like. So sometimes that kind of rote testing, you have to know this base kind of piece is called for to solve a certain problem. But other time, more interactive, creative learning and like arts education and things like that are more called for. I don't know the answer. I think there are many answers. The most important piece is what are you trying to accomplish and why? And once you understand that, you can design it more structured or more free form to meet the target. But your insight is actually spot on. It's the same type of dynamics.
So we have another question from Celine about creating a culture that supports this. Celine, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, so I was sort of thinking about our robotics team and how like sometimes we need to like sort of organize volunteer projects, but those can be hard to organize. And my team sort of has a culture where like it's hard to ask for help. So I was wondering like how do you establish a culture of asking for help when needed, especially when like working in spaces where people are reluctant to ask for help?
It's a really good question because everyone is reluctant to ask for help, even me. Just ask my spouse. But it's just a natural tendency of people like, oh, I'm so close, I'm just going to keep trying. In some cultures, it's bad to ask for help because the boss will say, what's wrong with you? Can't you figure this out? And aren't you a leader? Aren't you innovative? Why are you bothering me? The way we solve this in work design is we set a boundary. When I worked at Harley-Davidson, we called it freedom with fences. The more skilled you are, the more freedom you have, but there's always a fence. So with someone with low skill, I'm going to give them a very narrow range and say, I think it was Celine, say, okay, Celine, you say it will take you 3 days to do this. Okay, if it takes you more than 3.5, I want you to call me. So we just put a design point in there. This is actually an example of a trigger, which I'll get to later, which is a design element, like a fire alarm. Put a trigger in place to say, when this event happens, there's no questioning about it. There's no decision. You, by design, you have to pull the cord to ask for help. And that's the way we do it. We define the situation when you need to ask for help. We always have it there.
Maybe one more.
Yeah.
Sanand, you had a question about how to convince people to adopt these methods. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so how would you persuade people to adopt this system? Since many people were actually used to the old system of management, how would you persuade people to adopt this new system?
That's another critical question. And because I have not only when I was working in big organizations and had to do this internally, but as a consultant, I had the same problem. When you're the boss, like one time I became senior VP of operations of a group with 5,000 people. And I just went in and said, you might not like it, but here's the way I'm going to work. And about half the people a year later were gone. Either they couldn't cut it or they didn't like it. So, but there are very few times when you can just say, this is the way it's going to be. Usually you have to work through influence. The window that I find, there's two windows I find. The first one is if someone has a problem, look, let me help you solve that problem. I'm going to give you free help. And because I know the structure of these problems from the principles, which you've seen too, there are a couple more, because I understand the structure of the problem and I can use a framework to diagnosis. I already know which direction the solution is going to be. For example, if I see the problem here is that the targets are not clear, that statement already shows me we need to strengthen the target. People don't know what you're asking them to do, or if the plan's not clear, or if there's no feedback, or if the human chain is broken. So all these are breakpoints. And because I can solve problems faster and I can offer people help when they need it, instead of preaching to them about working a different way, I can show them by producing results. And they go like, wow, that's pretty cool. How'd you do that? And usually to Celine's, I think it was Celine's question about motivation, when we put these systems in place, people actually enjoy them more because they're more engaged. They're part of the whole running a system. They're all connected. It feels more like a team. So not only does the person get better results, but their team is like really happy. It's like, how does that happen? More work and they're happy. So I think that's really the window in, is solve a problem and demonstrate. And if you're lucky, people will ask you, hey, how'd you do that? And you can get a convert. But mostly it's by just doing it and learning. The other, I don't think you guys have this yet, but someday you will. You have a boss and the boss doesn't want to do this, but you do. So the way I would do it was, I would just say, hey, boss, you know this problem we have over here? Yeah, I know this problem. Well, I'm going to make a 30% improvement of that in 60 days. I'm going to come back to you with the results in 60 days. 30% improvement. Remember that. The boss is not. The boss goes, oh yeah, whatever, Kiefer, go whatever, get back to work. But 60 days later, I come back in and say, look, remember the thing I talked to you about? Here's the actual numbers. And it wasn't 30%. We increased it by 38%. And the boss will go, wow, that's pretty cool. Then I'll do it again. I'm going to predict the change and then deliver on the change. About the second or third time I do that, that supervisor becomes very interested in me because they don't care. Maybe they don't care how I do it. They don't want to know, but they're very interested in me because I can deliver results to them, which helps them. And if you're lucky, they're going to ask you how. So there's been a lot of studies. So that's kind of the two windows in, but there are a lot of studies in big organizations where even if you are demonstrating a better way in your kind of area, better results, if it's against the culture of the organization, the DNA of the organization will crush it because that new method is going to disrupt the whole way people, the skills they need and the way they progress in the organization is going to change the game, change the rules, and they will just consciously or unconsciously crush it. So you need the safety of the authority structure to protect you while you change it, while the new way becomes the new culture. But it's tough. It's very tough. You can't really convince people. It's called pushing. You just have to show them and kind of infect them with a new way of working. It's the way I've learned to do it. Good question. Let's take one more.
Okay, so there's a question from Nandana. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, about what that means for leaders. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Let me find my question. When a dynamic work design is implemented, how does it change the role of management? Do their necessary skill sets change and do they become less relevant?
They don't become less relevant, but their role does change. Instead of telling what people to do, they become coaches. Because now, if I've got the dynamic work design in front of me and we're seeing problems and solving them and generating new methods, instead of coming to the monthly meeting to see the numbers that we don't know and get yelled at and be told what to do, we are bringing the numbers because we know what the numbers are. And we're also showing what problems we solve, what advances we need, and what support we need to make the next change. And so then the management gets to sit back and say, okay, I like what you're doing, but you need to do it this way. They become coaches and resources, which are much better relationship. Now, some people don't want to do this. They want to sit behind a desk and give orders, but people who want to coach and help figure things out are good leaders. the thing I read recently about the definition of a good leader is it's the person that finds the solution, who finds the way. They don't have to execute it, but if they can see the way and lead people to the right solution, that's what people respect, and they'll follow that person because they're making headway. Dynamic work design helps that because they become very skilled problem solvers. And because of the principles and the structures, they can see the underlying structure of the problem. Even though they know that the solution will be very unique to the conditions, they can lead people to get engaged in solving because they know where the solution is going to go. Okay, let me finish a little more content. We'll stop again. We'll stop again for some questions. Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay, so third, structured problem solving. This just means, and you'll see in a minute, is that we have to write stuff down because the way our brain functions, which I'm going to show you in a minute, we need to have a structure to the way we solve problems. We can't just like shoot from the hip, or what they call jump to solution or jump to conclusions. We have to really think and analyze. You guys know this because you're STEM students. You know about science. You need to think and analyze. That's what this means. The fourth one is manage optimal challenge. Are we pushing hard enough to get as much done? Or are we pushing too hard? And that, I think, is based on this curve. This curve's about 100 years old, and it shows that if you don't have enough stress in the system or on a person, the performance will be low. As you raise the stress on someone, the performance will go up, but there's a point when it goes too far and their performance deteriorates. So, for example, think about it. If you were a piano student, the first song you learn is, okay, happy birthday. What's the next song you learn? It's not Mozart's 7th Symphony. That would be too much stress for you. You just give up. They want to just add a little more stress, the next harder thing that you can achieve. And that's the top of that curve. We got same thing with athletes. I want to stress my body just enough so it gets stronger. Not too little, it won't get stronger, or not too much, it'll break down. So if you're down on this side, you want to push harder, raise the target, put more work in, create more stress on the system, good stress. But if you're over here and it's total chaos, and you need to stop and solve more problems. So here you're just putting Band-Aids on and running from one problem to the other. It's just chaos. So if you're over on that side, you want to slow down a little bit. You not only want to find and fix problems, you not only want to find problems, put a Band-Aid on, you want to solve a little bit of the root cause so you're continuously strengthening the underlying system beneath you. And that's the top of the curve. Now, an important idea for what you're going to be doing. There are two modes we work in. One is called task. So that's when you get your individual tasks assigned and you go do them. Like, I'm going to code, or I'm going to build this thing. There are known methods, predictable output. It's individual work. Like, I can say, oh, this will take me about 3 hours. It doesn't have to be exact, but I know what to do. Task. The other type of work is when you meet together as a group. And here what you're trying to do is solve problems and make decisions. So you're going to cycle between these two modes of going to do work and then meeting to look at the plan. And there's two ways you do that. The first one is called a check. This is to say, oh, we're going to meet every hour, we're going to meet every 2 hours, every day, or every other day. What's the frequency? We're going to get together and check on all the work, see how everyone's doing. That's a decision you have to make, a design decision. We're going to meet every 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, once a day. Whatever it is, it's a design decision. The other decision to make is, what's the trigger? Where's the fire alarm? How long should I go? What type of problem should I call someone? Like we said before, when I'm having a problem, how far can I go on a problem? How many hours can I work on that problem and not without an answer before I say, hey, we got a problem here. I think I got it, but it's been the 2 hour limit. I need someone to come and help me think it through. That's called a trigger. So designing how often you switch between these modes with a check and where the boundaries are for a trigger is a really important design decision on how your team is going to work. Okay, now, 2 math problems. I'm going to put up a math problem on the screen, and I want you to put the answer in the chat box as fast as you can. Okay, everyone ready? Here we go, as fast as you can. Right. Okay, here comes the second one. Are you ready? I'm going to do it again, as fast as you can. Okay, there's the answer. Now, what's the difference between these two? What's the difference between these two? Why does this happen? Here's the reason why. Your brain basically have two modes. If you want a book to read about this, there's a great book called by a guy by the name of Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Thinking Fast and Slow. One mode of your brain is really fast. That's the automatic processor. It works on pattern matching. This is where all your experience is. That's where you drill 2 by 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 3 is 6. You drill that and drill, it becomes a pattern, it's automatic. And that part of your brain is faster than the other part. The other part is your conscious analytical processor, which is you can't memorize a second math problem, so you have a process. So you have to switch, you have to write it down and think and work through a process. Two different kinds. And why is this important that we pay attention to these two different kinds of parts of the brain? One works on pattern matching, not logic. One works on logic and analysis. Why is this important? Okay, we have another question. I'm going to put a question and I want the answer in the chat box as fast as you can. Ready? Here we go. Okay, good. So the answer to the question is why is this important is because this part of your brain, the pattern matching part of your brain makes mistakes because correct, Rihanna, it's Noah, not Moses. But your brain saw the pattern of the ark and animals and went to. But you didn't see Moses. Your brain just missed that part. You missed it. So that's why in structured problem solving, we have to write things down. When you write things down, it forces the question up into that analytical part of your brain, out of your pattern matching part of your brain, because the pattern matching part of your brain is not that good at language. It's patterns, it's flashing images. So you want to push problems up there. And this is why we go to visual management. This is part 3, especially when we work with intellectual work, intellectual products, science, research. We're going to make the problems, make the work visible. So here's my rule. If you can't draw what's going on, you can't understand it and you certainly can't fix it. If you can't draw the wiring diagram or the logic diagram of what you're proposing, you really don't know what you're talking about. So you have to draw it. Again, it forces us up into that logical part of the brain. Right, the arc did trick your brain, exactly. But you do this all the time. And in fact, if you go to some of the biggest industrial accidents in the world, what happens is highly experienced people are looking like 2 gauges are both supposed to be green, but one turns red and your brain says, no, that's not possible. And you totally disregard it. It happens in nuclear reactions. It happens in big oil explosions all over the place. The more experienced you are, the stronger that pattern matching piece is, which is why we have to be careful to write things down so we can see it. So we want to give invisible intellectual work a physical face. So for example, this is my office in about 2002. On the left is all strategy. Well, this is my office too, but you can see on the left are problems, the yellow and blue are activities, the red are problems, and the place was pretty chaotic. Here it is 2 years later. On the right side, that's all the operational work of factories on 3 continents, shipping and receiving, supplier, blah, 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 all that stuff. On the left is all strategy. And we have it mapped out because I told my group, if we're going to do something, I want every word on the board. I want to see where it's going to get done. So those arrows around that middle document, that's the annual plan that went to the board of directors. Every word, that first little column is mine in operations. Every word in there where it says we're going to do something, I want to see where. I want to tie the concept to actual human activity, and just to try and get as clear and clearer on the plan. So here's my advice to you. And it's best if you can post it on the wall. Quantify your targets. Get them really clear. How are they measured? How do we know? Build a plan with the least number of tasks to get there. Cut out all the stuff you don't really need. Defines who's going to do what task. Know who to call if you run into a problem and how long you can have a problem before you have to ask for help. Decide how often you have a short team meeting to check the progress, summarize what you learned, raise and solve issues, adjust the plan, get back to work. That's how you can put this to work. And by the way, here's an example. This is, you see targets and quantification on the left. You see themes. So one might be digital, mechanical, whatever, how you divide the work. The yellow Post-its are the task. The extra means it's done. The red means there was a problem to get delayed. So now I can see the status of the work really clearly, but it doesn't have to be fancy. These are people working in tier 1 automotive supplier, and they're working on their product development program. They're working in Post-it notes because the important thing here is the human conversation, not the document. They can easily change. There's a concrete wall and Post-it notes and masking tape, and they're redesigning their product development system. So again, I'll finish with this and take questions. Here are the 4 things. When you get your plan on the wall, here are the 4 things to think about. See if you can see it on the wall and the questions to ask yourself. And if you can answer them, you've probably got a good plan. Okay, that's it. Question.
All right. That was excellent. Thank you so much. We do have some questions. Sanjana, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, so I just had a question about how to limit the number of meetings and like what an ideal number or strategy for planning them would be.
You need meetings, but they should have a purpose. And I would suggest you apply this criteria to deciding whether you need a meeting or not. Are we solving a problem or making a decision? If we're not doing one of those 2 things, we don't need the meeting. But we need the meeting to get together to look and make sure we get all on the same page, get all the assumptions out, make sure we know what we're doing, and then go to do the work. But if the meeting is not focused on solving a problem or making a decision, then you should cut it down. And I think the other piece is, if you can write down what the decisions are you have to make and what the problems are beforehand, let people think about it beforehand, you can get a lot of work done outside the meeting and come in the meeting, make the decision, solve the problem, go back to work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there was a question a little bit earlier from Mason talking about dynamic work design and the role of emerging automation. Mason, would you like to revisit that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously like automation's becoming a lot bigger, especially in like manufacturing jobs. So sort of how does automation impact just work design in general? And then I guess more specifically, how does automation impact dynamic work design? Because it's pretty heavily based on getting input from the workers, but how do you get how do you get input from your workers if they're all robots, they're not people?
Good question and a difficult one. I'll hit one aspect of it. The mistake people make before automating something is they don't truly understand it. So, for example, on a mechanical assembly line that's all manual, someone comes in and says, oh, we should automate all this, save a lot of money. Okay, so they design the robots to do what they think is happening. But really what's happening is there's a lot of hidden variation in the ways people are doing things that they absorb and take into the job. Like, I know when I get this piece from a certain supplier, I have to tilt it a certain way, or I call, or I do some little thing over that. But the computer and the automation only does one single thing. So the first bit of guidance is use dynamic work design to map the work and get it running absolutely smooth. And then you can automate those pieces of it. And the second piece of advice is put a detection center in there, because problems will always arise. And how will you know the robots or the algorithm or the software is continuing to perform the way you want? It won't. Over time, it will deteriorate, or something will change, or someone will write the code, or something will happen. So you have to put that detection system in at quality at every step. How do we know every step was done correctly, so that as soon as there's a problem, we stop and go check, and then we can learn and change.
Thank you.
So here's a question that might be a little timely. Snahasri, I'm sorry, did I pronounce that correctly? Pothankar?
Yeah, sorry, my mic wasn't working.
That's
Hi,
okay.
so my question was, I really love all the pieces of advice you gave, but a lot of them were interactive, and a lot of the pictures that you used were like people in the same room. And how do you suggest we apply these techniques in a remote environment such as the one that we're in right now for BWSI?
I think it's a good question, and I think I just saw Oliver have a similar one, which is How do I know I need a trigger or versus the task is just going to take a long time? And I think the trick we use is if we don't know how long it will take, I'll just ask the person, how long do you think this will take? I think this will take me about 2 days. They could be totally wrong. But when they say 2 days, okay, at 2.5 days, I want you to, or 2 days, I want you to call me and tell me where you are. And let's see if that was exactly right. So putting these frequent checks in is a way. So I think the same thing is true since you're all virtual. It gets a little tougher actually if some people are on site and some people are virtual, but since you're all virtual, I think it becomes, you'll find ways if you look for them to check to make sure everyone knows what they're doing and they can contact someone to let them know if there's a problem in between and when we should check back next. So I think you can get the same design elements and they're going to show up a little bit different way. But if you stay with the concept, you'll figure out like how far should we go before you check in with the group? And maybe a certain person needs to check sooner and just base it based on people's guess. If they're wrong, okay, then you can adjust later. But start with trying to make a prediction of what's going to happen in the next day and say, okay, should we check halfway through the day or not? Or, maybe we should not, or we don't need to, or maybe we should check 4 times a day. Making that prediction of what you think is going to happen, checking it against what really happens, you'll find the methods virtually to either one-on-one or in a group to get together to solve the problems that you find. You can also, if you get stuff on the wall, you can take a picture of with your iPhone, email it to everyone. If there's like one person's keeping the map or the plan, email it to people so they can keep up. But you find a lot of little tricks to, maybe it diverges and periodically you bring it back together because you're not all looking at the same room. But try to get as close as you can to that feel of all looking at the same information. It's triggering a lot of thoughts in our brain so we can ask a lot of questions. And then when we're done, it all looks the same again, we all agree.
Got it, thank you.
It's the human conversation, the rich human conversation that you're after, not the particular structure of the Post-it notes. Good question.
So I think we're getting close to the end of time. So thank you very much, Don. This was a really engaging presentation, and you can see that the students are certainly have lots of questions. I will send you the chat at the end so you can see the fuller discussion and digest it as